really looking forward to thinking about how open science has changed, some of the initiatives, and thinking about whether, what's been achieved with those initiatives a bit as well, and future trajectories. Just before we start though, the Open Science Room is very kindly and generously sponsored by the Wellcome Centre for Integrative Neuroscience in Oxford. And so we have a word from our sponsor, and Tom Nicol is going to talk about that. It's entirely, as long as you have the microphone, then it's up to you. If you sit here,
Okay, that's fine. Good. Hi. So, if we have the first slide, please. So the Wellcome Center for Integrative Neuroscience in Oxford has been a long-time sponsor of the Open Science Room at OHBM. We're really proud to have done that. So we just want to take a few words, if you're not familiar about it, and to let you know what goes on at WIN. So next slide. So WIN is the combination of sort of 4 different sort of themes. I actually want to stand up. Is that all right? I need to be able to see this. Okay, that's better. Right. So part of it is taking work on understanding cognition in humans. That's upper left. Part of it is actually doing stuff in animal models and actually looking at ex vivo materials. And then the other element is population scale neuroimaging. And then the final theme is methods development and physics. So we try to bring together all these themes around imaging with MRI. Next. Next slide, please. Oh, you have it there. Okay, and so the thing that's important, you might have heard of FIMRIB, but it's the thing that's important about WIN is that it's actually an integration of 3 different sites at Oxford. So in addition to the John Radcliffe Hospital, where we have the traditional functional center for magnetic resonance and imaging of the brain, there's also the OBOS site. That is where the MEG is located, and there's also EEG there, and that's on the psychiatric campus of the hospital, psychiatric hospital, the Warnford. And then we also have a center in town, and that's where the animal imaging is done. So it's really important because we're physically dispersed, but we use sort of the connection of our work and themes to sort of tie staff together across all these different sites. Next slide, please. So here are sort of some of the faces that are involved. Just to give you an idea, you probably recognize some of them. Actually, Irene Tracy is now the president of our university. So actually, she's not so involved, but we have someone in a high place that we like to draw on. Okay, so next slide. So we have lots of public outreach activities. We had this great launch event, which was open to the public, and we've done continual sort of outreach activities since then. And there's just an amazing collection of people, both senior people, as you can see there, Heidi Hansenberg, as well as first-year grad students, all get involved in these outreach activities. Next slide. So this is just, we have an ongoing public engagement sort of committee that people can get involved in, and they just do some really amazing stuff. My favorite is the Center for Creative Brain. I went with my daughter to a neuro fashion event they had where people sort of wore these different dresses. Some of them were electronic, some of them were using EEG labeled things. So really fun sort of creative events that they use to engage the local community. Next slide. Next, I don't think it's build. We're really proud of the efforts that we've done in training. So you might know there's the FSL course that happens yearly, but more importantly, there's a locally run graduate training program that we offer to people at Oxford. So that's an advantage of people who are coming and getting started. And there's also these excellent books that have been written. So we're very proud of the effort that's been put into to training. Next slide. The other thing we're very sort of open on, and this is something that I'm involved in, is open science. So we have an open science team where we are trying to make as much of our work as open as possible. The one thing where we have sort of made progress on is we have a protocols database where we use to basically register and share all of our protocols, and that's open and accessible on the internet. And we also have some tasks that are shareable. We had a plan to basically make all of our data available as much as possible, but information governance as well as IT issues has kind of made that limited, but we had aspirations. Next slide. And yeah, that's everything about WIN. Thank you so much, and we're really happy to be a sponsor.
Thanks again. So at this session then about the changing face of open science, we have a panel of very esteemed open science researchers. So to start off, we have Dan Margulies, who was very heavily involved in the early days of the open science SIG here at OHBM. So Dan is carried out his BA in New York, followed by a master's in SASFI in Switzerland, and then a PhD in Humboldt University in Berlin. He's now the research director, or one of the research directors at the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, and please apologize my French there, in Paris, the CNRS, and has had a huge influence on large scale, on trying to understand the role of large scale brain networks in human behavior and cognition, and particularly looking at intrinsic brain activity. We have Oscar Esteban as well, who is an Ambizione FNS Fellow at Lausanne University Hospital. And many of you will know Oscar from his work with NIPREPs and fMRI prep. And so he's developing tools for researchers with analysis grade data. We also have Janine Bijsterbosch. And so Janine carried out a PhD in Sheffield, followed by postdoctoral experience in Oxford, and then joined WashU University in St. Louis in 2019 as an assistant professor in the Computational Imaging Research Center of the Department of Radiology there, where she has a research program that develops computational neuroimaging approaches and leverages epidemiological data sets to identify brain markers of mental health and elucidate principles of functional brain organization. I'm also delighted to say that we have online okay. So we do also have online, so roll speaker to main stage. We do have Pradeep Raamana, and so Pradeep has a bachelor's in maths, physics and computer science, followed by a master's in physics at the Premier Indian Institute of Technology at Madras, followed by a PhD in biomedical engineering at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, where and since then he's worked on predictive modeling approaches in Alzheimer's disease and contributed to large multi-site integrated discovery programs at Ontario Brain Institute. So a range of experience, a range of backgrounds, and but all sharing this interest in trying to promote open science and think of the best ways and initiatives to do that. So if I can start off by asking you, what motivated you to get involved in open science first? With Dan Margulies. Yes, and then I will sort this out.
Great, thanks so much for the chance to join this panel. It's a real treat to be here and to be able to chat with everyone, and there are like so many people in the audience that also have really built this community and have so much to share. So it's a treat to be up here and talk a bit. The question was what got me first involved and interested. And I think it really, for me, started in, we had this idea to start a kind of renegade organization called the Neuro Bureau many years ago. And all we had at that point was a name. This is Cameron Craddock and myself. And then the question became, okay, we've got this box now. It's catchy. But what do we do with it? And I think we decided to really invest that energy in promoting open science because it would help to make, it was really about creating that community that we wanted to be a part of. It was about creating an open vibe, about being willing to share ideas, share code, share resources, and generally be supportive of one another. So it was very much, we were early career, and this was a way to be able to gain both access and contribute and be a part of a group of people that would be more fun to work with.
Thank you. Yes, like Daniel, I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate very much the invitation. So in my case, I think Open Science gave me the opportunity to engage in the world-class research and of the academic system. Unfortunately, I was at the time a PhD student in the wrong place with the wrong mentorship. It's not fault. I don't blame people at the moment around me. It was my fault mostly. My immatureness got me in that situation. And Open Science was the way of changing this unfavorable environment. And in the end, for me, it was something like, well, if I cannot do science myself because I don't have data, I don't have like these guidelines, at least I'm going to help others do good science. And the moment the first release of the HCP came out, so I started there was this flooding in data all over the world, and these less resourced labs were able to start doing some science. So that finally ended up in, streaming my PhD to the end and helping me get new opportunities after that when I went to Stanford.
Thank you. And Janine.
Thank you. I think I was just inspired. I mean, I saw it go from just the word to grow into like this community of people that had an impact on OHBM, I think, and created a community of people that were just awesome and people I wanted to work with. And so that, having seen that growth and having seen that impact was just something that I wanted to be part of.
And then Pradeep.
Sorry, I missed the first few minutes. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What motivated you to get involved in Open Science to start with?
Yeah, so it was right after my PhD, I discovered both Python and Open Science community, actually on Twitter. And it was really vibrant, really open, where I believed like it was kind of, you can be yourself, do the things you believe in, and still push science ahead. And I believed that up until like a few years ago. and I mean, I think it has net positive contributions for sure, but it's not reforming the fundamental structure of the science and academia, which is what I'm somewhat disappointed about. But otherwise, it's been a fantastic run. Does that answer the question?
Thanks, Pradeep. Maybe we can start with you for the next one, and that is, what challenges did you face on your journey with Open Science?
Mostly lack of professional recognition for what we do. I mean, there is recognition in the community, especially OHBM, which is one of the most supportive and most supportive communities. But in terms of developing a career and doing it in a sustainable way, doing what we think is important, there is not enough recognition, and which is what motivates me to advise people, just do it when you can, but don't focus your career on Open Science. That's what I've been promoting for the past few years.
Thank you, Pradeep. Do you want to take over, Janine?
Sure. Yes. I don't know. I mean, I feel like this community has so much energy, more so than any other communities I think I'm part of. And when I was chair of the Open Science Special Interest Group, the number of volunteers who really come through and like make these events happen, both on the committee, but also like much beyond the committee. There's such a big group and so much energy there. I found that really exciting. And so I don't, coming to Pradeep's comment, it's true that actual reform is slow. And maybe that's frustrating. And I agree that that's frustrating. but if you look at what we've achieved, you know, I think it's pretty impressive. And I think open science used to be like this niche thing that some people really cared about very deeply, and others thought was just like a hippie like movement. And I think that has changed completely, right? I think now if you don't share your code, like, or you have some kind of outdated open data sharing or other sharing statement, I think that's really frowned upon, and now you're the like old school. So, and that has happened relatively quickly. So yes, there's a long way to go, and I think we can do a lot more. But I think I just feel really inspired and emboldened by the energy of this community and what that has achieved so far.
I can take it. So in my case, perhaps because I'm the least experienced here, I think I faced 3 main problems when I started. The first one was unwillingness or lack of knowledge from mentors, university, the environment. It wasn't ready for open science solutions. The second thing I felt is slowness in my research. I saw all other PhD students showing fancy results in conferences, and in the end, they wouldn't care about what's the license of your code and you know, is it open? Can I use it? So I felt like I was lagging behind. And finally, I had lack of formal training. I felt like I was not ready to do what I was doing. I was risking it and doing things because I believed in them, but without having a solid ground where make decisions. So I think those 3 factors, I guess, are still there, and many trainees who are now starting will meet this kind of problems. It's also true that in many places this has changed, and there is a real substrate for open science, and perhaps I'm more aware of these problems because then I went to Stanford, and with Ras and Chris, I really noticed, or the contrast was so clear to me that it became very, very tangible.
Yeah. And Daniel?
I think early on, one of the challenges that we faced was really wanting to have a seat at the grown-ups table, and really having to both strategize about how to be taken seriously and have a voice in the discussion about where the community was going or initiatives that we put in place, and then having to very carefully defend some of the values that were easily misunderstood or interpreted in a different framework that wasn't consistent with the values that we were excited about. And then I was thinking about it also, there's a second half to this story, of course, that is, I think it's become really clear that over the past several years, the open science SIG, the general movements within the community have that seat at the grown-ups table. And then the challenge kind of becomes, well, okay, but we also want to be able to have that playfulness and that energy and those ambitions and creativity and possibility and kind of open space that made it so much fun to build this in the first place. And so how to also keep that other position. I think that's one of the ongoing challenges.
Yeah. And Oscar, you're talking about how this is starting to be integrated now. So how do you find that open science is influencing kind of modern neuroimaging practices?
So I think it's evident that open science has permeated our field very deeply. We are a community which is leading in data sharing, thanks to many efforts located at many places, to a point that right now I think every graduate student has access to some data set to start with, even in the worst possible conditions. You still have some access. Obviously, there are barriers that are unsalvageable, like, you know, if you don't have an internet connection, you will not be able to download a terabyte of data, and those things need to be addressed. Those are still a problem, but nonetheless, in neuroimaging, we have a lot of data, and at the same time, also software, because I think part of this development has been to first focus on the data, which is kind of our main source of knowledge, is where we extract the knowledge. But then you have to formalize that knowledge, and that is done through software. And we are lucky to have so many tools that are open, that are out there for people to do really incredible things, just putting together a few tools. And the learning curve is, of course, steep, but there is this possibility, which in other fields is kind of far away. So yeah, I think even the original efforts like NeuroDebian, which now sounds like a thing of really back in the past, are impressive. And then all the tools we are in between all the community are sharing and putting together.
Daniel, where do you see the achievement so far of open science influencing modern practices?
I mean, it really is so varied at the moment. I do think it's a completely different experience entering the field now than it was 10 years ago. Let me collect, would you mind? Sure. And I'm going to come back to me because I'm still trying to find.
I mean, riffing on what Daniel was saying earlier, the Open Science League does now have seats on both council and program. So we have the seats at the table, which comes with its own challenges, as you pointed out. But I personally think the push for open publishing is exciting. I feel it's kind of a no-no to have any papers behind paywalls, and we're trying to push back against for-profit publishers, and so I personally think that's exciting. I think also within publishing, the move towards registered reports, I think, is a big one. It's still a little bit underutilized. Pre-registration is more common, but registered reports are a little bit less common. Also at journals, a little bit less available at journals, but I think those are some of the big wins. And that's, I mean, of course, there's the open data and open. I feel like we're implementing the word open in more and more spaces, and that's a good thing. Even to the and also to the point of inclusivity. I feel like the fact that the fact that the Open Science Room has continued with hybrid setup is something that I'm personally very proud of, and the fact that Pradeep can join us online and be part of this conversation, as well as the audience online, I think is something that's exciting. And again, another version of open. Hand it back to you,
Niels.
Pradeep.
Can I? Okay. Actually, the funny thing is, I agree with most of what was said. There is more access to data, papers, software, and community, especially if you are able to make it to HBM, for example. I've been extremely lucky that I could make it to HBM and many other conferences quite regularly. So to push back a little bit on some of the things said, what we need to think about is not is there an incremental progress in number of open access papers, data, software, etc., or did it change the fundamental structure of the community, for example, right? The reason that is important is a lot of the times, we've seen every paper claiming, hey, this is a novel method, this is a novel solution, and we all know that's just a nominal novelty that people use to publish papers. In the same vein, people are talking about open science just in name. Maybe they do it in letter, but not really in spirit. For example, there's a lot more open data sets. No dispute about that, like phenomenally more data sets. But it also takes a lot more energy and resources to even use them to the extent to produce results that are publishable in a decent paper, for example, or a journal. And also talking about move towards open publishing, fact that neuroimaging editors moved away from Elsevier and started a new thing to reduce the processing charges was fantastic. We were all super happy about it. But why didn't they merge with, let's say, OHPM Aperture? an initiative we pushed for 5 years. Everybody spends hundreds of hours discussing the structure, processes, mechanisms, sustainability, open science, and whatnot. And then when the actual, like some what you call material change happened in the community, they didn't merge. And so far, I don't understand why they couldn't merge, other than the reason that there was some differences in values. For example, maybe I'm totally wrong. I don't know. I'm not part of the inner circle. But from what I could hear from the very senior people is just there's differences in maintaining quality, defined very subjectively, and how they approach software, for example. Right? That's one of the examples of there is momentum and action happening, but not following the spirit and the ideals that we preach to, let's say, newcomers into open science. That is just one example that I can put forth that is recent that we can discuss.
Yeah, we'll come to some of these hard problems in open science in just a second. But yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, sorry, just the one other point that I would throw in is like the transformation, what the currency is in the field, right? You go back 10 years and it was, if you had these data sets, that was your resource that you protected. And now that that has become available, there has been a really palpable shift in the field in terms of what is of value, and it becomes analytic tools and, let's say, knowledge in pre-processing data, and then that is made available. And that, again, has a shift in what individuals are able to bring uniquely to the table, what becomes of value and contribution. So I think that's part of the fun of open science, is that it creates this ever-changing, evolving, developing terrain of value.
Yeah, and I definitely remember, seeing people starting off with the registered reports initiative. I know you mentioned this, Janine, and even just the idea of pre-registration following along with clinical trials, and that was a niche thing for quite a few years. But now, I've had it where I send in a paper to a journal and they say, "Is this pre-registered?" There's an assumption. Well, there's that as a minimum level that they're looking for. So that's the wholesale shift in how some open science practices are perceived. So I guess, yeah. So Pradeep was touching upon this, but what are the hard problems facing open science now? And I guess we've covered them a little bit, thinking about incentives and so on. But Oscar, where do you see the problems remain?
So to me, basically, we are the problem and we are the solution. And the main issue, I think, is the resistance to change. As Daniel was saying, open science embraces this very dynamic process of science, and people find it hard to adapt to that rapidly changing pace. So I was here and I was thinking, okay, we are a lot of people actually who are missing right now interesting science happening next door, because we chose to come here and talk about open practices and open science. That, I think, is the challenge. We need to change that. We should not need to choose between doing it right and what is being done. Both need to go together. So perhaps the challenge is to get everyone in this mindset that the default should be open. And then beyond that, I think is where we were going to have these breakthroughs, which will be the next question, I believe.
The publishing, space of publishing seems like one of the critical spaces to develop further. And who knows, there's so much effort going into rethinking this and to developing new models and approaches. I mean, I'm sure we're all aware of many of them, but it's there's still a lot of space for rethinking that from both the bottom up and the top down and all sorts of ways.
Sure. I agree with everything that's been said before. I'll pick on incentive structures. There's grants, hiring committees, tenure committees that I think are changing. I mean, our tenure and promotions at WashU just got revised to include team science. So to more actively value big collaborative projects where people might not necessarily be the first or the last author, but still have contributed a lot. So it's not directly open science, but it's kind of related. But yes, I think for grants it's hard as well, because a lot of it, there is so much value, especially in our field, in tool development, and I feel that is not always appreciated by grants. So I think the incentive structures are trying, but it's like the bigger you get, the slower they move, right? You know, we complain about OHBM, and that's bigger than the open science room and the open science SIG, and so they're slower than you are. And I feel like the grants mechanisms and universities are even bigger and therefore even slower. So I think they're listening and paying attention, but there's definitely more to be done there.
Yeah. So I witnessed this recently on recruitment panels where where people's research was focused on data sharing and on software to enable that. You know, I think where you had other senior neuroscience researchers, they were sometimes like, well, what's the question? What's the biological question you're actually answering? And other people who folded that into, you know, the open science practices into what they're trying to ask were sometimes ranked higher in those processes. And so it's about, hoping that seeps through and actually goes into the broader hiring panels and communities and so on. Pradeep, where would you say the hard problems are now?
I think the biggest impact can be achieved by getting folks to practice what they preach. You know, people are preaching open science and seeing it as I'm not saying it's everybody, they have bad intentions, but a lot of the times we don't see people practicing what they preach. And I think it's not a good thing, especially when we're trying to recruit new generation of, let's say, graduate students to commit to this long-term thing, you know, because it doesn't give them career benefit unless they just use it as a vehicle for progressing their career. That's one of the biggest problems. And there is progress in improving, giving credit for people who contributed down deep in the chain, but that's not helping in terms of developing a career. I think somehow using that to get people to develop careers on their open science work, I think is a necessary thing to actually solve the problem. Because what I've noticed is some of the most brilliant people in this community, at least I know of 5 to 7 people who actually left. Like they're not even doing academic research. I would have thought they would just flourish because not just they're brilliant, they've done excellent contributions and whatnot, but they just couldn't survive and sustain. I can't give details that they told me, but many people I know that, I mean, you probably know Talia Arconi, Chris Gorgolaski, Christy Daker, Anisha Keshwan, Cameron Kardec, and all these people. You know, I would have loved them to see contribute much more towards this community because they've done wonderful things. And I'm not sure if that can happen, but I think that's one of the hardest problems, helping people develop a career practicing open science. And if they can find ways to do that, I think the movement will flourish and achieve its objectives.
I see a hand there. Come on, please.
You know, there's the say. Well, it's not a saying, but I think it's good heart about when a metric becomes the target, it ceases to be a good measure. Are you afraid that there would be something like that happening related to what you were saying? Something like that would be happening with open science, that because the open science seems to, there is some kind of like we see in industry with the greenwashing. There is some kind of open science washing in, for example, publishers. Do you think there would be something like that happening with open science potentially, and that we need to fix or help not happening?
Pradeep clearly wants to answer.
No, I was saying,
First,
I was answering him. It's yes, 100. That's exactly what's happening. I'm not saying it's everybody does that, but there is enough careerist people who do that. And I think sometimes they often actually contribute net negative contributions because it's like one step forward and two steps backward because they come and become a roadblock in the discussions.
Someone else wants to answer to that question?
Well, I don't think it's actually happening. I'm sorry to disagree with you, Pradeep. I think open science is the method, so it's not the target. We need to talk about it because it seems, or it is clear, and I think it goes back to the question I was posing before, that you need to choose between producing faster and producing with high quality and being accountable for what you are doing. And I think open science is the slow way where because you open everything you've done, others can look into it. So in a way, I think it only helps implement better standards. And coming back to your analogy of measurement, one of the ways you have to make your measurements more reliable is standardizing how you are measuring. So I think open science is about all these standards, and I think in a way it's orthogonal, right? So I think we need to embrace it. It's not. It's a demand from the kind of work we do. We need to be able to show what we've done and allow others to replicate it. So I think it's part of what we should be doing. Otherwise, you can go to companies where they do a lot of research and they have incredible products, and they don't have this need to show it to others because they are not really doing science per se. They are developing their products. So they are advancing knowledge, but without this responsibility for advising the human consolidation of that knowledge.
I have a question for the panel. I'm wondering if you could paint a picture for me of what open science utopia would look like. Where is it that we're heading? What is it that we would like? And beginning with consent, because nothing has been said about consent, but yet that might be the beginning to publishing. What's utopia?
I'll let people think about that one and answer that one. Maybe I'll talk about a little bit of a bridge between the two, because I think one thing, kind of in response to what you were saying and what Pradeep was saying, people might not be practicing open science exactly the way we want them to, but I don't think it's out of ill intent. And so I think it's better to encourage people for the things that they're already doing. And, you know, as a community kind of push towards the utopia that you're kind of wanting to see. But I don't want to push anyone away who might just be doing a little bit of it, because I think that's where it starts, right? Hopefully their intention isn't to try and get away with it. Their intention is to learn and see how they can build on that. So anyone have a utopia that they want to present?
So utopia is the end of the plateau, because then the other question is where in 10 years. So for utopia might be different for all of you. I'm just curious, or maybe there is this perfect utopian open science world, but kind of it sounds like what you're saying, we're heading the right direction. It's going, is it going fast enough? And then where are we going, I guess?
It's a fun one, yeah. Because with a lot of these utopian visions, they do become problematic in the details, don't they? And consent is an interesting example of where this becomes particularly complex. And how do we balance the desire for openness with whether any number of constraints, whether it's protection of the individual, thinking about things like GDPR policy in Europe, or career needs, and how do we move that, like the incentive structure, right, that's been coming up, or the, let's say, balancing with priorities on effort towards answering scientific questions versus the process through which we get there. And this is where like core values probably become what's most important, and not using structures that we put in place in order to help the community move towards sets of practices that we agree are of value to the field, using those as stepping stones towards reinforcing a certain culture of practice, but not as the ends themselves. And this is where I would take a step back. I think it also addresses the question you brought up, Chris. Like, I think it's important that we don't over-constrain as well, because we get shifted too far away from the underlying like motivation for those rules we put in place as a either community or publishing structure or like organization structure, and the values that motivate them. So I don't know, that was a bit of an abstract answer to the question, but I'm curious for the thoughts as well.
So I resonate a lot with what Janine mentioned about registered reports. For example, in an utopian world, I would see that most of the science is carried out through these procedures where you plan ahead and basically say what you're going to do and try to stick to the plan as close as you can. Without stifling, new ideas, because sometimes you need to get out of the path, and this is something that came about yesterday in the panel, right? So I see registry report as a tool for implementing this. I imagine that when you are going to submit your paper to a journal, there's always these two mandatory boxes where you have to choose what is the license of your primary data, what is the license of your secondary data, what is the license of your code. And there in there you have several licenses, and then you have a box where you can say this is not available. And then papers will have this, data unavailability, unavailability statement instead of a data availability statement, because the default would be it is open. So I think that time will come at some point, and we will still need these statements, because some data will not ever be able to be shared because of privacy concerns or health records, etc. And that's part of it. We also have the responsibility of protecting these goods of the society. So I'm not saying everything should be open. What I'm saying is the default should be we go open, and then we consider case by case. And there are places where it is not so possible. There might be some code that needs to be protected for some time. I don't know what is the situation of that, but it could be. So I imagine that. I imagine that, as also you mentioned before, selection panels take open science methods as part of your scholarship, your contributions as part of a relevant part of how you do science. And I also would like to see these OSPOs that universities are opening these offices for open science to become more common, instead of the old technology transfer offices where they are about just protecting.
Yeah, we talked about this a bit in one of the earlier sessions this morning with Peter Fox, actually, where he was saying, they have at the institutional level, they have IRB approval to create a database of everyone that's scanned, and so they have this huge data set then of people with different conditions and diseases. And I've had that in certain institutions, and when I've suggested it in others, it's been closed down. Just the idea of having this kind of open data set for analysis, and it's difficult to know whether that's fear of indemnity of some kind of claim going in, or whether it's knowledge of the legal aspects. And so figuring out like how do we, even just within institutions, actually try and implement more kind of open initiatives is something there. Pradeep, do you want to come in on that as well? Or?
Yeah, so especially about the utopian vision. Uh, I dream about a community where people don't have to be politically correct, you know, and people can basically speak their mind, speak truth to self-preservation, so to say, if I can frame that, you know. I think that's one of the problems in discussing these hard issues in open science, because a lot of the times people tend to reframe everything in a positive light as opposed to just calling a spade, so to say, you know. So I think that's not there, you know. Just to give some examples, uh, there are like when I was talking about getting people to practice what they preach, I don't mean people to do hurting themselves to implement the absolute best possible spirit of open science. I mean doing things that don't hurt them but also advances the goals of the open science. For example, people still keep publishing most of their excuse me, papers in Nature, for example. Like that's their primary target. Like Nature scientific data being one of the popular ones these days for methods, Nature methods or Nature scientific data, etc. Why don't they publish in OHBM Aperture? It's something we built, ground up, right? It's, and like think about very well established, fully tenured professors with no concern for reputation or where they need to go. They can do advance the cause by just changing what they do, but they are not doing it. So unless I'm totally misinformed, in which case I would apologize and would like to learn, but I don't see that. They're still propagating the what I would call pyramidal schemes, and people have other names for that. And that's my utopian vision, where basically people speak like basic no political correctness. That doesn't mean we have to be rude or unkind or anything. Just not be afraid to say, like for example, even peer review has not been fully open yet. There has been massive push, and there was wonderful initiatives, you know, academic karma and few other things, but it's not the norm. Like what Aska was saying, default should be open, especially for peer review. Where is it? It hasn't occurred yet, you know, because that would go a long way, right? For example, I was in the diversity and inclusion committee for 3 years or so. I've been pushing to get the nomination letters open, right? They don't want to share it, and because there is only one award for each of the small categories, and we know there is more than one deserving candidate each year, like males and females, even the most obvious one, but also people do a number of wonderful things, and they need to credit the credit today, not 10 years or 20 years from when they become big enough and people cannot ignore them or whatnot. And we hear all sorts of stories about a lot of push to get somebody awarded as opposed to someone else. And these are candidates which are like massive people in the community, and they had to go through all sorts of politics to get the award. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I don't want to be politically correct, you know.
It's kind of the dark side of the scientific prestige system, isn't it?
It's not the dark side. You know, basically, I was going to comment on the title of the panel. You said changing face, right? What I was thinking today was it's basically open science is revealing itself, revealing its true face, so to say. We have enough data in the last 10 years to see what is possible, what is sustainable, etc. I think. And as long as academics continue to act in their self centered, careerist manner, the structure is not going to change. It may be nominally open, but not truly open. And if we don't, like for example, for reproducibility, we need to make it fully reproducible, not just a little bit better than 10 years ago. And we should keep pushing to towards goal, you know? So that's where I come from. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Would you like to ask a question?
Speaking of, this split between the session over there, session over here, I feel like, and also like feeling safe. I wonder what's being done in terms of like contracts in academia, the types of hiring contracts, because like a lot of people that I have talked to who are working on open science, they're like considering like alternative career options, like always being on the toe.
Yes, they should.
So.
Who wants to answer?
Oh.
So I think Janine already mentioned that, right? Like having open science as part of the curriculum and making sure that so sure. You need to build it step by step. And right now we are in a system where we're not yet in that utopia. And right now scholarship is measured in different ways, which are not including open science. But if open science finally becomes part of the priorities and part of the strategy of universities, then we will see how people who embrace this open science career path will have more opportunities. This is a topic that also it came up yesterday as well, and we had a long discussion about this. Like, it is true that right now most of the people who are practicing this open science are people who are doing something close to data science and very technical with attractiveness to industry. So in the end, they end up dropping out. I guess this conflates, and this is what I said yesterday as well, it conflates with the problem that we have too many trainees for the number of positions we can possibly generate globally. So it is a discussion that has been coming from the past. We have too many postdocs and then very few places where locate them after they finish. So sorry, Jenny.
No, thank you.
No, I just like, even for people who don't do open science, do you think things will change if people had some job security? Like,
I think this is a really, really hard one because the funding is cyclical and it's short term, right? I would love to. I might look like I have a long-term secure position because I'm a faculty member. I'm up for tenure, but I pay myself for about 90% of my salary from grants, and even tenure doesn't mean that much anymore. You know, if I stop getting in grants, I'll get in trouble, even after tenure. So, and I would love to offer my trainees and my students a full-term position. I totally get the anxiety and the like, all of the other challenges that come with that, but I get funding for 5 years at a time, and I think everyone does, and I don't know how we would change that, because there is no way to secure a long-term pot of money for this type of research. So I hear you, and I think it's a really big problem, but I think it's a much harder thing to change than a lot of the other things we've been talking about. Realistically,
like in Germany, there has been, some years ago, the discussion came up because of the limitation of the number of years you can stay as a postdoc hired by public funding. Yeah. And if I see like professors around me, like they all care about these things, but like people move continents to work with them, and like, so I mean, they're tenured themselves, but then like, it's a lot of pressure. Yeah.
But even that, I think we're just all in the same boat here. It's not that the professors could but won't, right? It's that the resources, the incentive structure and the resource structure doesn't allow for a change in that.
Well,
yeah, perhaps what Zane's trying to tell us is how open science could help solve this problem, right? The other way around. So I think the problem is there, right? So it's a design question, is how the system is built. And even if open science was not, a concept, and everyone was working in closed rooms, still the system is this way. So there is this limited number of resources. Science is often not the first priority in our countries, in most of the countries, and there is no sufficient muscle to absorb the number of trainees we generate. So in the end, they end up dropping out to industry. So I think it's open science could help in trying to redefine the incentive structure and all these things, but I don't think this goes beyond open science. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well,
how much? Oh, sorry, Pradeep.
Yeah, no, quickly, I think it's a good thing that people are leaving academia, actually. The way open science could help is simply telling people from the very beginning when they're getting recruited as a PhD students, hey, this is what it means to pursue an academic career. And are you sure you want to do this? Do you have the sufficient personal and familial privilege to continue this? Because there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. Would you be happy being on a 1 year contract or a 2 year contract, even after spending 20 years to develop a career, and then you realize that there is too many factors that are not in your control, although you've done everything right. So the one easy way we can help is stop recruiting too many graduate students that we can support. And just tell them from the very beginning, say, hey, PhD is good for you. No, the PhD is shown to be net negative for most graduate students. Only some enjoy the benefits of a fantastic academic career path. So you train them accordingly, maybe from the middle of the PhD or even right after the master's. These discussions, we've been promoting it for many years, and it is taking effect. Postdocs are much harder to find now, precisely because nobody sees a good path forward. And that's not a bad thing. They will find a nice equilibrium somewhere where academia will only recruit or encourage number of people they can actually sustainably support.
To think about open science practices and how they end up spinning out and becoming more common. So for those that have been involved, so you see that certain funding institutes have requirements. So they're saying, oh, how are you going to share your data? How are you going to share your code? How much of that happened as a kind of organic thing where enough labs started doing it that the funding agencies noted, and how much of that happened, do you think, from lobbying, from actually going to the funding agencies and saying, well, this should be the minimum standards that we require as a field now? And should we be doing that? Should the OSCIG be spending our time going to funding agencies and going to other institutes for this?
I don't know that there's an awful lot of lobbying going on. I think it's more organic. I mean, I'll say what in our I was in the neuroimage, one of the neuroimage editors, and walked to Imaging Neuroscience, and so I negotiated with the Elsevier people, and they told us if you can get funders to not allow us to charge $3,600 anymore, then we will stop doing it. That's the only reason we will stop doing it. But they were saying, they didn't just care if we only got NIH to say that. They were like, no, you also have to go to like the German funders and the UK funders and we didn't even try, because that is a more than full-time job, and we have already multiple full-time jobs. So I'm not aware of much lobbying going on. Maybe other people do.
I'm not either. I'd be curious if anyone here knows about what initiated that.
Well, there is a lot of initiatives within NIH focused on this too. They are pushing, but they have their own, fear of reforming a big system. And I think there is some push, but not enough, basically.
Yeah, thank you. Sina?
I had a question which revolves around the idea of the incentives behind open science and how that would relate to the utopia that we want to create. The way I see it these days, apart from some privileged labs that have adequate funding from other resources that would support open science for the rest of the community is more of a charity in which early career researchers spend time in terms of providing their code and data and maintaining that without seeing any clear incentives for it. And I'm wondering, for that utopia to be created, the same way that we discuss about these things when it comes to inclusivity, is it possible to even imagine a future in which there are funding sources that are specific for open science practices, not just for practices that tick a box as that they are providing their code or data, but that practices that are focused on creating better open science futures. So basically, how far are we to that part of the utopia that we see incentives that are dedicated to open science?
I can just speak. That's a great point. I can speak for the French funding system, where there are specific calls for open science initiatives. It's become a major priority of the French government and research, and of people at the top of the major research institutions to be pushing various open science practices, particularly in publishing in software tools. And they see that as a major national resource as well. Tools like scikit-learn, for example, that really come out members of this community as well. So there are these shifts that are occurring in terms of encouraging development of methodologies and making funding available for that. Are other national schemes that are changing?
I mean, the NSF has some open science oriented funding mechanisms. The NIH starting to slowly. And one of the things, I applied to one of these as an NSF things, and one of the things you had to explain is how is this sustainable, right? Because like we said before, funding is always on a cycle. You never get funding forever. And so one of the things they really wanted to see in that proposal is how are you gonna sustain it beyond this period? And they did, and the NSF actually provides they have a high performance computing cluster, and you can apply for credits on the cluster, and those are relatively easy to get compared to like actual funding. And so I think that's one mechanism in which they're trying to provide resources longer term to kind of sustain some of these things. That doesn't speak to the salaries of the people doing it. But yeah, I think it's not perfect, but it's starting to see some evidence.
Yeah, I think it definitely, I don't know if Pradeep was going to talk.
Yeah, I think Sina was referring to open science for the rest of us without highly secured funding, And that's the key point, because, for example, even in the US, the BRAIN initiative was fantastic, and Human Brain Project was a big thing, for example. A lot of the times when we apply to like what Janine was talking about, funding is somewhat preferred towards established ecosystems as opposed to new ideas from younger PIs, so to say. We've seen Open Neuro and other important initiatives getting funded, repeatedly supported, and it's a wonderful thing. But there's not a lot of smaller efforts from younger labs that were not sufficiently funded. And some of the people I mentioned that left the field, they left because they didn't see hope of getting continued, somewhat reasonably sustainable support to develop a career over it, So I think to answer Sina more directly, I think it's basically the rich are getting richer. They're helping with neuroscience, but I don't know if that is a good thing in the longer run. I think they should distribute it towards peripheral sections of the open science effort as opposed to already very well established ecosystems. And are they doing it today? I don't know. I don't think so.
So I think I agree with the voices that it seems grants and funding bodies are becoming more aware of the necessity of at least ensuring projects are going to embrace some open science practices, and they're going to share the data, share the code, etc. And there seems to be growing interest. I think societally, most regions in the world have these values in them. So in the US, for example, public employees cannot impose any copyright on their outputs, and that's been there for a very long time. It's not new. So all the code they generate is open because it cannot be closed. So the foundation is there. I think what is a challenge here, and it's a huge challenge, is a problem of governance. If you want to create a big thing like scikit-learn, which is, I think, one of the most prominent examples we have, you have at some point to move it beyond the walls of a single lab or a group of labs, and it becomes a community tool. And communities require governance, and that governance at this moment is very incompatible with any standard funding mechanism we can think of. And we have a very clear example right now with BITS. BITS has achieved a position in the landscape as an open science tool, but I would not apply for a grant for BITS, because as a PI of that grant, I will have no leverage at all to make it change if the community wants something different. So as an individual, I cannot try to get funding for that. And right now, there's no funding scheme that would allow a team of chairs of a steering committee, for example, the BITS steering committee, to apply for a grant with knowledge that maybe the steering committee is going to change in down 3 years. So there is a real challenge where we really need to figure out. I think in France, there are actually some, scikit-learn has managed to put together some funding. So I guess in some ways, there has to be some mechanisms there, but there we have a real challenge. It's really difficult to how we are going to structure this.
I mean, I think I just want to say that bringing up the governance issue, I think is a fantastic point to discuss that hasn't really come up yet. And looking at creative solutions, I think even for the OSCIG governance, there are a lot of places where we could be rethinking in creative ways how to enable stability as well as change. These are really important points to be discussing as a group. Yep.
So yeah, I guess another thing to kind of end on, going closer towards the utopia. We had an interview with Cameron Craddock where he was mentioning that at one stage there was a funding agency that mandated that people had to share their data if you wanted to receive funding from them, and certain PIs turned it down. They said, well, if that's the case, then I'm going to walk away from that. And I think that actually, I think that's less common now. I think in even within that kind of 10-year period, it's starting to become more standard. I think there would be fewer people who would be in that position.
They learn to adapt, Nils. They share it, but with embargo periods and a lot of usage restrictions and whatnot. A lot of Canadian data sets, they come with like zone 1, zone 2, zone 3 of sharing. And it's a big hoops to get through. Takes a longer time, at least 6 months of embargo period where they'll get all the initial papers doing the basic statistics so they can garner all the citations towards that. So data is getting shared, but with not in the spirit that we like.
A half step towards utopia then.
Well, I mean, the credit is still going to the people the way the traditional PIs like. They put all this work to collect and whatnot. They feel they're entitled to get all the credit, and they're forced to share it, which is a good thing. At least it'll be there long term. But share it as soon as possible, make it easy. No, we want to get all the credit before we share it, kind of thing.
Yeah, Neil.
Ironically, I want to make a strange point, but I think potentially an important one. And I say ironically because it's about the use of the word utopia. Stop saying that what we're trying to do is achieve a utopia, because utopia means a place that does not exist. And originally it was put forward mostly as a piss take, basically. What we're trying to do does exist. Like, we're not trying to achieve utopian things in the sense that it's unachievable and childlike and nonsense. It's all quite just simple, he says, and practical. We're not trying to achieve utopia. We're trying to change systems that we ourselves build. And so we can change them because it's us that built them, would be my argument.
I think it's a very fair point. I totally agree.
I'm relieved to hear that.
It's more of a direction more than an utopia, right? I think we're misusing the term utopia.
I mean, I'll just go for it and like double down on utopia just for the fun of it here. It's a great point. But I was thinking a bit about, because another angle of this whole thing is the utopia is that we're doing this all in the service of something, right? We're all into open science. I think fundamentally we enjoy the practice of it, we enjoy the community, but we also appreciate the value that this adds to being able to answer scientific questions together, and to be able to broaden the kinds of questions that we can answer, and to reduce the amount of effort that it takes each of us individually to get there. Right? We're not doubling work as much. And I think the utopian vision is that there's this magical day in the future where we can ask a scientific question and we're able to take advantage of all of that work that has happened previously, and all the doors are open to being able to answer that together.
I think Oscar already said it like a while ago, like we are also the solution. I think the question was, what are the hard problems? But your first response was, we are also the solution. And I think this is what it does come down to.
I just also want to get on this utopia thing, which is that one of my favorite ways of it imagined, like for example, in queer theory, is that which is not yet, that which is on the horizon of being imagined. And so like, I think that there is a very practical notion of utopian direction, which is essentially broadening the horizon of political imagination. And so I think that rather than having a sense of a concrete end goal and a sense of where we're working for in a decade, this is a useful thing to do, this is good. Having trajectories is important, it directs effort. But I think that the goal should tend to be to create further possibilities more or less at all times, and understand that our responsibility isn't to realize a goal that we developed, but to make space for new ones, for emergent possibilities, and expand the scope of political imagination as we go. So that was my contribution to the utopia thoughts.
Lovely, and I think that's probably a nice place to end, actually. So I'd like to extend a huge thanks to the panel for quite a wide-ranging discussion today there, and to Pradeep online as well. So first of all, a massive thank you. For people who do want to engage in the discussion a bit more, have other questions that haven't been resolved, we're going to have a table talk at 1 o'clock here, and so there we'll sit in a circle and we'll think through some of these issues and think through directions for anybody that can make it. So please do join at 1 o'clock if you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Niels. Fantastic panel.